Hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Telegraph's deputy comment editor, Annabel Denham, with us from now until just before midnight with lots to say, no doubt. So to the front pages, starting with the Financial Times. Hunt leaves the door open to more tax cuts. Their headline following today's budget saying that Jeremy Hunt could yet make more cuts before a general election is called. The Guardian says Britain will now go into the next general election with the highest level of taxation since 1948, despite the cut in national insurance. Annabel's paper, The Telegraph, says that that cut, in fact, signals the end of national insurance for good at some point in the future. The Times picks up on that point too, with the Chancellor calling national insurance an unfair tax he'd like to abolish. The Metro says the Chancellor decided to cut and run, setting out the battle lines for the general election and pulling the rug from under Labour's own policies. But, asks the Daily Mail, will this be enough to see off Labour? The Eye says Labour has now decided not to raise taxes for the wealthy if it comes to power, even though there could be a £20 billion black hole in the country's finances by then. This is the verdict of Kevin's paper, The Mirror. We deserve better. The Express, more supportive. Britain ready for takeoff. The headline there, and it's quite contrast, isn't it? While the Daily Star leads with new research showing that men who eat fatty foods, such as a full English, are more attractive to women. I'm more intrigued by hug a slug at the top, to be honest with you. Anyway, reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests, Kevin Maguire and Annabel Denham. So, fascinating. Quick take, first of all, your verdict. Kevin?
Underwhelming. I don't think it will change the political game. You look at the Daily Mail, whenever they put a question mark in a headline, the answer is no.
Annabel?
I agree with Kevin. It didn't feel like the last budget before we go to the polls, did it? So it had a short-term feel to it. To me, I suspect there might be another fiscal event before voters go to the polls where a rabbit will be pulled out of the hat, because there certainly wasn't one of those today.
You know, in future, I think Jeremy Hunt could just send round a whole load of press cuttings, because we just about had it all in advance.
Yes, so why did that happen? And did that diminish? I mean, if you look at the Matt cartoon in the Telegraph tonight, it's a rabbit at a bar with the publican going, not out the hat again, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the point for many people. But still, some fascinating details. Let's kick off this idea... Oh, there we are. So not pulled out of the hat again. Thank you very much for getting that. There it is indeed. Which has certainly been the sense from many people because of the leaking and the pre-briefings that we've had. So let's head to the Financial Times. Hunt leaves the door open to more tax cuts. Your paper, The Telegraph, as well. Hunt signals the end of national insurance. Is this what it's about now? Is it squeezing out national insurance for good, do you think, Annabel?
Well, I certainly hope so. I would like us to see us remove national insurance altogether, not just on the employee side, but on the employer side as well. I think a fundamental problem with national insurance is that most people believe that they are paying towards a pot for their retirement, which, of course, they're not. It's just essentially another form of income tax. And in that regard, I feel as though the government is being slightly dishonest with taxpayers. It's also a tax on working. It can disincentivise people from taking a job or working longer hours. So I'm in favour of removing it. However, it's going to be extremely costly to do so. £5 billion for every 1p which is taken off, which is significant given the parlous state of the public finances. So whilst I support Hunt signalling the end of NI, I wonder how realistic and achievable it will be.
It's a qualifying payment, though, for the state pension. You've got 35 years for a full state pension. Some unemployment benefits, out-work benefits, it's also a gateway to those. So that would have to be looked at. But I think the real question, if you get rid of it, is how do you fill the gap? It's 45 billion, I think, is the figure if you get rid of it for employees. Employers, it's much higher because they pay 13.8% for every pound over 175, I think it is. It's something like that. You get. I mean, that hasn't been cut. That's still high, and I think it's one of the government's big big earners. It's something like 170 billion it was. Maybe it's come down now with these 10 billion cuts, the 2 for employees. But that's a huge amount, so it's more than like the health budget. So what are you going to do? Shut down the NHS? How are you know, genuinely, how are you going to pay for it? And we mustn't forget that despite the fact, and Ed Conway did the figures, you know, the tax has gone up 6.8 billion, 13.2 billion cut. So there's a slightly bigger cut in this, but taxes are still going up. So when you see the FT, Hunt leaves a door open to more tax cuts, well, they're still increasing taxes. They're still increasing how much they take from you. So it's not actually, I mean, the cut really is they're just going to be taking a bit less than they were from you, but it's still going to be a rise.
Of course, but they're going to
across
raise
the economy,
in other ways. And the main way that they're doing that is through fiscal drag, which hasn't been addressed. So we have these frozen thresholds which are not moving in line with inflation. And the OBR suggests that the government could be pulling in an additional £40 billion a year through fiscal drag by 28-29. It's a massive sum of money.
Personally, I have no objection to the overall tax take going up. Well, I know it's going up to a rate, it's going to shock you, I know, highest since, was it 1948? But other more successful economies have a higher take. It's just who do you take it from? And there's nothing, there's no radical thinking in sort of equalising capital gains tax with income tax or
even Labour have ruled out equalising capital gains.
We'll get on to that, everything Labour's ruled out, which I think is a mistake.
The idea of these tax thresholds, the more people are going up, with inflation, you're likely to have a wage increase, which puts you up. DOBR's figures, by 2028-29, the dates you quoted, 2.7 million more higher rate taxpayers and 600,000 more additional rate taxpayers. So huge numbers of people are finding themselves in a different tax bracket for their earnings above that level. So the idea of thresholds, again, being frozen has certainly upset very many people.
It just feels a bit like a sleight of hand. Cutting national insurance, but we're still pulling you into these tax brackets.
People on the minimum wage. Soon, people who just have a state pension will fall in to the bracket. It cuts in at 12,500, you start paying income tax. The state pension now is beginning to nudge that level.
Yeah. So let's take a look at the Daily Express. I think you laughed, Kevin, when it came on. Britain ready for takeoff. But the point is, what we started to see here was an indication of what the Tories' message will be for the election, which is that we've turned a corner on inflation and soon on growth in the economy. That was kind of the suggestion, wasn't it?
That's right, but it's quite difficult to make such a suggestion when we know that we're in a technical recession. Now, it's possible by the time we found out that we were in a technical recession, had gone into one at the end of last year, that actually we were coming out of it already. But nonetheless, it's a difficult story to sell. And as I say, I think this was quite a short-termist budget. I didn't feel as though the Tories set out a long-term plan for growth in the economy, a vision for the economy. And to the Daily Express,
there was the idea that the UK would be a great environment for investment, for example, in the tech industry or film and TV, with a mention of our fantastic Sky Studios as well. So there were elements of that, weren't there, do you think?
Yeah, I remember Gordon Brown. I remember Gordon Brown doing that rather regularly.
You're from the supportive paper. What's going on?
But look, the Express, along with some other papers, backed the Liz Truss budget of 2 years ago. That was a 45 billion tax cut. It was far bigger. That was all going to take off. They all hailed it at last a Tory budget. And then it all went absolutely pear-shaped. Quasi-Kwarteng, Truss went off. Interest rates soared. This is not a takeoff. It's just not. It's more a holding pattern. Now, maybe they've got maybe there will be another financial statement before a November election, or maybe they're saving something for their election manifesto and setting traps for Labour that way. What would Labour do?
I will muster up some enthusiasm for you, Anna. Of course, as the Chancellor set out, he's right that inflation is now forecast to go back to the Bank of England's
Has the Telegraph given up on the Conservatives as well? It's sort of, is that where we're at?
It's realism, though, as a journalist, isn't it? Look, the economy, turbocharging the economy was not turbocharged. I don't even think Jeremy Hunt himself would claim that. And if you look at the growth figures, they would not...
Well, exactly. Even the revised growth figures.
They would not justify turbocharging.
While you pick up to do your mustering your enthusiasm, I'm just going to show you The Guardian, which is a last desperate act. Obviously, Labour's view on that. And your paper, The Mirror, We Deserve Better, stagnant budget for a stagnant country by a stagnant government after 14 years in power. Is that the best you can do? So maybe you could summon the enthusiasm to counter Count those two left-leaning papers.
Inflation is coming down to the Bank of England's target. That's obviously a positive development. It acts like a tax, eroding people's pay packets. So that's welcome. How much the government can claim responsibility for it, I'm not so sure. But the fiscal plan that Rishi and Hunt set out was always that we will bring down inflation and then we will look to address the tax system and how we can reduce the burden. But, you know, ultimately, I think the fundamental problem remains, as Kevin has said, that we're going to have the highest tax burden in 7 decades at the end of this Parliament, and we have to find a way to get back onto a lower tax footing in Britain, because that's how we will grow as an economy. And I mean, I would also just say that I'm slightly disappointed that Jeremy Hunt didn't do more on the spending side of the ledger. He talked about productivity gains, but how much is that going to play with voters?
Well, 3.4 billion for, you know, bringing it up the archaic IT systems.
Yes, but voters have heard that before, haven't they? And I don't know how supportive they are of trying to shoehorn in IT upgrades in the NHS.
10 or 12 billion disaster in the Labour era, actually. But if you look at the Guardian's opening paragraph, the intro, it's a case for the prosecution that Jeremy Hunt will go into the election with the highest tax at the highest level since 1948, and the threat of a fresh squeeze on public spending after polling day. That is the prosecution case. On average, people will be worse off at this coming election than they were.
I suppose the only thing is, can they remind people why it's so high, which is, first of all, the financial crisis, followed by the pandemic, followed by a war on European soil, and that's what they maybe need to...
missed out a B word.
Brexit.
Yes.
4% effect on GDP, I think we heard from the OBR today.
Yep, that's it.
Yep.
Others say it'll be higher, but...
OK. Yeah. Anyway, we've got lots more to pack in. Moving on, Rishi Sunak promised to deliver the largest reduction in migration on record, but new figures suggest nearly 2 million people could arrive in the next 5 years. We'll discuss that next. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me now, Kevin Maguire and Annabel Denham. We continue our conversation about the budget. A couple of things struck probably all of us about what the Chancellor had to say. First of all, he wanted growth, but not driven by migration. Secondly, that we still have 900,000 vacancies in this country. And we have a huge number of working-age people who still do not work. So how you square the issue of migration, vacancies, and getting people back to work, it begins to be seen in some of these articles.
That's right. So the Office for Budget Responsibility has upgraded its forecast for migration. It went up from just shy of 300,000 to 350,000 between now and 2028.
Each year?
Each year, exactly. So there's a significant increase in the UK population over the next few years, though, of course, less than we've seen in the last couple of years, where it's been 700,000. Now, a problem we have in the UK at the moment is that while GDP has generally been going up, albeit at a very, very small amount, GDP per capita has been decreasing. So while we have a large number of people coming into the UK, actually our growth is not matching that in the way that it ought to. A concern I also have is that high levels of immigration have covered up the problems that we have with worklessness in the UK, because it's been allowed to mask them. If you can fill vacancies with foreign workers, perhaps through the shortage occupation list, then you can ignore the problem that actually growing numbers in Britain today are economically inactive. They're not working, and they're not looking for jobs. We have an increasing number of people who are long-term sick, and yet we've got 7.5 million people on the NHS backlog, so we're simply unable to treat them. I mean, the problems feel like they're very difficult to solve, and yet I'm not sure the can be kicked down the road for much longer.
It's on the front page of the Telegraph as well.
Rishi Sunak's going to be furious when he finds out which party's been in power for 14 years when this has been happening. The Telegraph has that...
Yes, the bottom left, isn't it?
Yeah, bottom left. 1 million more migrants to probably the economy, which they are. They're working and paying their way. The number of people of working age who aren't working is up 700,000 since lockdown, since COVID, up to a decade high of 9.3 million. Of course, that's got to be tackled. Labour accept that too. Liz Kendall made a speech on it the other day. But it's interesting, if you look at the Times, though, just before some people go bonkers, the people coming in pay their way. They just point out from the OBR figures that they'll contribute an additional $6.5 billion a year in tax revenues by 2028-29. That will result in a reduction in borrowing of $7.4 billion. But the extra cost of public services, because of course people coming in will use them, is $6.1 billion. So they will be a net contribution. But that's not to say that tackling worklessness is a real issue. Now, some people will be disabled, some people will be sick. It's how can you help them stop getting disabled, sick in the first place, whether it's physically or mentally.
And get the NHS waiting list down to treat
exactly,
people.
and then get him into work. No magic wand. I don't believe cutting benefits and taking a whip to people is the way.
We've run out of time. We didn't get to the woolly mammoths back by 2028, but we will soon. Thanks to both of you. See you for the 11. Thank you.